Do you know what she said?
Let them eat cake. What do Instagram filters, Botox brows, and a $20 Sheen corsets have in common? Apparently they all belong in 18th century England, at least according to modern period dramas. Have you noticed it too? That strange feeling when you're watching a historical show and everything feels a little too polished? Like you're scrolling through a fashion influencer's Instagram rather than peeking into another time. Suddenly, Marie Antoinette has filler. Elizabeth Bennet's dress looks like a Bridgerton brand collab with Pretty Little Thing. And every corset has the same pastel sheen you'd expect from a Glossier ad. The makeup is modern, the lighting is hyper bright, and the costumes, technically historical, but spiritually very much 2023 influencer core. Shows like Bridgerton, The Great, and Marie Antoinette aren't just bending the rules of historical accuracy, they're reflecting something deeper, our current obsession with looking perfect, polished, and aesthetically curated at all times. This video isn't just about bad costume design, it's about how our modern beauty standards shaped by social media, filters, Botox culture, and fast fashion are bleeding into the way we dress the past. We're not just rewriting history, we're airbrushing it. So if you've ever wondered why today's period dramas look more like fashion edits than time machines, you're in the right place. Grab a cup of tea, put on something with a little lace, and let's unravel how our filtered, aesthetic-obsessed reality is quietly ruining historical storytelling, one pastel corset at a time. Chapter 1, the aesthetic flattening of history. Let's start with the most obvious culprit, Instagram, or more specifically, the Instagramification of everything. What began as a humble photo sharing app has evolved into a full-blown aesthetic machine. It's not just how we present ourselves anymore, it's how we see the world. The Instagram effect is subtle but powerful. It trains our eyes to crave clean lines, bright lighting, symmetry, and a curated palette. Every image is staged, filtered, and airbrushed into an ideal. And over time, the visual language starts to seep into more than just selfies and vacation photos. Nowhere is the shift more apparent or more jarring than modern period dramas. Shows like Bridgerton, The Great, and Marie Antoinette don't just take creative liberties with their storytelling, they take aesthetic liberties with the history itself. Every frame is designed to be screenshot friendly. Pastel hues, flawless complexions, and costumes that feel suspiciously like something you'd find in a Revolve sponsorship haul. It's less about recreating the past and more about crafting a visual mood board, one that fits neatly into the algorithm. Compare this to period films from the 90s and early 2000s. Think of The Age of Innocence, Sense and Sensibility, or The Piano. These films felt like you were stepping into another world. The costumes had weight, literally and metaphorically. They were richly layered, often muted in tone, and beautifully imperfect. You could sense the social restrictions stitched into every bodice, the emotional tension expressed in every hemline. Makeup when used was subtle, lighting was warm, sometimes dim, mimicking candlelight rather than ring lights. Characters felt embedded in the era, not styled for a digital campaign. Today, that immersive quality is largely gone. Modern costume dramas favor clarity over atmosphere. Every detail is visible, yes, but it's curated to please the Instagram-trained eye. The world has texture, but is digitally smooth. Everything is just a little too perfect. The curls too glossy, the fabric too pristine, the symmetry too staged. There's no room for visual noise, for the messiness that made older period pieces feel so lived in and emotionally real. What's more troubling isn't just the loss of historical accuracy, it's the erosion of fantasy. Period dramas once allowed us to escape into different worlds, to feel transported. Now they offer a version of the past that's been scrubbed clean, decluttered, and aesthetically streamlined. It's no longer a portal to another time, it's a filtered echo of the present. The goal isn't historical fidelity, it's vibe. A look, a screenshot, a moment of aesthetic pleasure that can be reposted, pinned and fed back into the content machine. It's fashion over function, gloss over grit. And when storytelling becomes a mood board, the emotional core often gets lost in the scroll. So what does it mean when our version of the past is shaped by the logic of likes and aesthetic cohesion? We lose the richness, the contradiction, and the messy humanity of history. And trying to make it beautiful, we make it forgettable. Chapter 2, Fast Fashion, Streaming Culture, and the Death of Texture. We can't talk about modern decline in historical costume quality without addressing one of the biggest forces reshaping both entertainment and fashion: speed. Once upon a time, period dramas were events. They took years to develop with meticulous attention to historical detail. Costume designers weren't just dressing characters, they were historians, storytellers, and artists rolled into one. Each garment told a narrative, often evolving alongside the character wearing it. Think of Elizabeth in 1998 with Cate Blanchett's transformation from naive young queen to untouchable monarch was reflected in the escalating opulence and severity of her wardrobe. Or The Duchess in 2008, where Keira Knightley's gowns reflected her internal contradictions, public opulence and private despair stitched into silk. These films didn't just show history, they felt historical. But the era of lavish, slow-crafted costume design is becoming increasingly rare. Today we're living in what you might call the sheen era of streaming, where quantity trumps quality and speed is everything. Platforms like Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon Prime are in constant race to churn out content. Period dramas are no longer once-in-a-decade prestige films. They're seasonal content drops designed to be binge-watched and forgotten by the end of the week. This industrialized pace of production bleeds into everything, including costume. Designers are often given impossibly tight deadlines. Instead of months of research and fittings, they may have weeks. Instead of creating custom garments, they're forced to source some pre-made pieces, rent from warehouses, or increasingly pulled from online retailers. And the results speak for themselves. Costumes are no longer meant to endure the test of time. They're meant to survive a shoot schedule and look good in high definition. That's the only real requirement. But the result is kind of canny flatness. Gowns don't drape the weight of real fabrics. Corsets don't shape the body. They just sit on top like a visual suggestion. The camera might capture a seam and bead, but somehow none of it feels real. And this is where fast fashion enters the chat. Today's historical costuming often mimics the aesthetics of the fast fashion giants like Shein and Zara or Pretty Little Thing. The silhouettes are vaguely accurate but oversimplified. The materials are lightweight, synthetic, and often unnaturally shiny under studio lighting. The designs borrow from historical inspiration the same way a fast fashion brand borrows from couture quickly, cheaply, and without much regard for depth and authenticity. Gone are the heavy velvets, intricate brocades, and painstaking hand embroidery that once defined period drama. In their place, we have mass-produced polyester-heavy garments that look good from a distance or in an Instagram post, but collapse under close inspection. These aren't clothes that breathe, wrinkle, or carry the lived-in energy of their era. They're props and aesthetic placeholders. And the most unsettling part, we accept it, not because we don't care, but because we're trained not to notice. Fast fashion has dulled our collective understanding of what quality looks like. We scroll through hauls and outfits of the day reels so quickly that we've lost touch with texture, with craftsmanship and clothing that has weight. And when we watch a period drama, we bring that same visual conditioning with us. Costumes in shows like Bridgerton or Emily in Paris, when it tries to do retro looks, are often praised for their aesthetic, but what we're really responding to is its trendiness, not richness, not accuracy, just the immediate hit of dopamine we get from something that's cute, colorful, and clickable. And that dopamine-driven approach to visual storytelling is a far cry from the immersive magic of classic period films. When the pace of production prioritizes aesthetic over authenticity, everything becomes surface level. Costumes stop being storytelling devices and start becoming set dressing. Instagrammable, forgettable, and disposable. So the question becomes, have we been so conditioned by fast fashion and streaming culture that we can no longer recognize what historical richness even looks like? Or worse, do we no longer care? Chapter 3, Instagram face, Botox culture, and the fear of imperfection. Let's zoom in literally on the faces. The phenomenon of the Instagram face has done more than reshape beauty standards. It has quietly rewritten the visual language of how we expect people to look. Even in fictional settings, even in the past, for those unfamiliar, the Instagram face refers to a highly curated, hyper-specific beauty aesthetic. Plumped, symmetrical lips, a small nose, lifted and perfectly arched brows, defined cheekbones, and a poreless, glowing complexion. And an overall airbrush smoothness. It's a face that doesn't exist in nature, not without injectables, Photoshop, and AI smoothing, and yet it's everywhere. Born from filters, Facetune, celebrity culture, and cosmetic procedures. This look has become so normalized that we now expect it in every visual medium, even in period dramas, where it makes the least sense. There's a kind of surrealism to watching a story set in 1815, only to realize that every actress looks like she just had Botox touch-ups and a chemical peel. These women, supposedly duchesses, or maids, or 18th century debutantes, somehow have perfectly filled lips, laminated brows, and not a single wrinkle, freckle, or visible pore in sight. It creates a strange feeling, not in the dialogue or the setting, but in the human face itself. And here's the deeper issue. This shift isn't about vanity or individual choices. It's systemic. Actresses, especially in mainstream productions, are under enormous pressure to fit the Instagram ideal. The entertainment industry increasingly rewards the homogenized look, not just because it aligns with the current trends, but because it photographs well. In a world where every still can go viral and every close-up is dissected on social media, perfection becomes the default requirement. But the ripple effect doesn't stop at the faces. The obsession with smoothness and flawlessness with visual cleanliness spills over into costume design too. In an industry where every frame is optimized for 4K resolution, costume designers are well aware that their work will be scrutinized not just by critics, but by the audience. Freeze-framed, zoomed in, broken down in aesthetic mood boards and Instagram reels. And so costumes start to mirror the same sanitized airbrush energy as the faces they're worn on. Fabrics are chosen to flatter on camera, not to reflect history. Silhouettes are softened. Color palettes are smoothed. There's a tendency to avoid anything too heavy, too real, too emotionally textured, because it might clash with the slick digital world these dramas now inhabit. Everything must be digestible, attractive, and on brand. It's not just about what looks good, it's about what won't offend the algorithm. In this way, costume becomes an extension of the Instagram face. Not just a design choice, but a manifestation of cultural anxiety. A fear of looking dated, a fear of showing too much humanity. And it begs the question, when did we become so uncomfortable with wrinkles, with asymmetry, with the visible marks of time, expression, and lived experience, even in fiction? And it's true, when I tried to watch Bridgerton, I couldn't handle the brightness of all the costumes. That kind of ruined it for me, but I guess if you just know that it's not historically accurate and you're not bothered by any of those things, then fine, and you just want like something it's fun to watch. I get that. I think it's because I studied the history of costume and then have a Bachelor of Design degree in fashion design. So all these things bother me more probably than the average person. And we've reached a point where even fantasy, which should allow for messiness and emotion and transformation, is subject to the same rigid beauty standards as a social media selfie. Period dramas, which once embraced texture and time, now feel like they've been run through a smoothing filter. Their characters don't inhabit the past, they pose in front of it. This sanitation isn't just cosmetic, it flattens the emotional impact of the story. There's a reason older period films resonate. Their characters felt human. You could see a hint of exhaustion in their eyes, a lived-in realism in their wardrobe, a softness in their skin that felt authentic. That authenticity made the story feel real. And when the humanity is erased, the emotional connection goes with it. So here we are in a media landscape where even 18th century women must look like they've just stepped off a Glossier campaign. We're not just filtering faces anymore, we're filtering history, rewriting it in the image of our modern insecurities and beauty expectations. What does it say about us when we can't even let fictional characters in the past look imperfect? When even a duchess from 1790 isn't allowed to age, sweat, or have pores? wars. Maybe the more pressing question is this: if no one in our past looks real anymore, how long until we stop believing those stories altogether? Chapter 4: When Costumes Told Stories. Let's take a moment to remember what historical costuming used to be, not just as a visual flair, but as a storytelling device in its own right. There was a time when costumes in period films didn't just reflect the era. They reflected the emotional lives of the characters. They weren't just historically inspired, they were emotionally intelligent. In Dangerous Liaisons, the costumes weren't just decadent for decadent's sake. They were political. Every extravagant ruffle, powdered wig, and lightly cinched bodice was a symbol of power, seduction, and manipulation. The characters wore their social status like armor, and their downfall was often signaled through the very same garments unraveling. In Sofia Coppola's Marie Antoinette, the costuming deliberately blurred the line between historical accuracy and emotional realism. The pastel wigs and lavender corsets weren't meant to mimic Versailles exactly. They were meant to evoke a feeling, a kind of girlish melancholy and decadent isolation. These were costumes designed to commute emotional truths, not just period fidelity. The infamous Converse sneakers peeking out from under Marie Antoinette's gown didn't break the spell. They deepened it, because the film wasn't just about a queen, it was about the existential loneliness of being a teenage girl trapped in a golden cage. Or consider Elizabeth from 1998, where Cate Blanchett's transformation into the Virgin Queen was told not just through dialogue or action, but through clothing. Her gowns evolve from soft, flowing fabrics to rigid armor-like constructions. She literally puts on power. The final scene, where she emerges in all white, her face painted in the iconic mask-like makeup of Elizabeth I, isn't just visually stunning, it's narratively devastating. She's no longer a woman, she's an icon, and we felt that transformation in every stitch of her gown. These films understood that costumes are not just decoration, they are dialogue. They speak to us, often more truthfully than the script itself. They tell us who a character is and what they fear and how they love and how they want to be seen. Costumes can carry shame, rebellion, grief, or longing. They are loaded with symbolism, but in many modern period dramas, that rich language has been reduced to a kind of visual shorthand. Today, costuming in historical fiction is often built for the screen grab, not the storyline. A puff sleeve equals cottagecore. A pastel corset equals Regency core. A hair ribbon equals coquette aesthetic. These choices aren't about character development, they're about marketing. They've made Pinterest boards for TikTok edits, for fast-moving content cycles that prioritize aesthetic over arc. It's no surprise, really, when so many viewers now engage with media through platforms like Instagram and TikTok, the goal becomes not immersion, but aesthetic recognition. Something familiar enough to trend, yet polished enough to sell. And what's the result? Costumes that are cute, yes, but emotionally flat. Brandable, but not believable. Pretty, but not personal. And this shift matters, especially for women. Historically, clothing has been one of the few narrative tools available to female characters. In patriarchal societies where women's voices were silenced, what they wore often was their voice. Fashion was a form of resistance or submission or subversion. It was how they navigated the gaze, negotiated identity, and expressed internal conflict. When filmmakers allow costuming to become generic or influencer coded, they rob women of their most vital storytelling languages. What we're witnessing now is a kind of emotional flattening. When all costumes are designed to fit current beauty trends, they stop reflecting who a character is, and instead reflect what an algorithm wants, and that's a profound loss. Because when we strip away the complexity and texture of historical costume design, we're not just losing historical accuracy, we're losing historical resonance. We're losing the ability to explore nuance, to feel the weight of a character's social role, their limitations, their internal growth. We're losing the emotional aspect in favor of aesthetic generality. So the question is, in our race to go viral, are we sacrificing the narrative power of costume? Are we losing the emotional depth that once made historical dramas feel so hauntingly real? And if we are, can we ever get it back? Chapter 5, the sanitation of fantasy. Here's the great irony. In our attempts to make period dramas more appealing to modern audiences, we've actually stripped them of what made them enchanting in the first place. Instead of immersing us in another world, many contemporary historical dramas feel like they're trying to sell us something, a vibe, a trend, and a lifestyle, but not a story. We sanitize fantasy. The fantasy of historical fiction was never about perfection. It was about transportation. The magic came from the sensory experience of the past, the creak of a corset, the flicker of candlelight, and the velvet hush of a drawing room, the sweat and dust of a summer duel, the melancholy weight of duty stitched into a widow's gown. The past wasn't clean. It was gritty, emotional, fragrant, and flawed. And that's what made it so captivating. That's what allowed us to believe we were stepping into another world, if only for 2 hours. But now, everything gleams, everything glows. Everything looks like it was edited with the same Lightroom preset. The lighting is bright, the colors are pastel, and the fabrics are just as synthetic as the actors. They look like they're on their way to a clean girl aesthetic photo shoot. It's all too polished, it's all too sterile. It's like historical fiction has been run through a ring light and scrubbed of anything that might suggest imperfection or depth. This visual sanitization extends beyond just costuming. It's an entire reimagining of the past through a contemporary lens. It's history with the edges sanded down. We remove the grit, the complexity, the smell, the tension. We replace it with mood boards, Instagram filters, and squeaky clean corsets. And in doing so, we lose the fantasy that these stories once offered, because the fantasy was never about aspiration, it was about immersion. It's also about control. When we dress the past in modern ideals, whether it's Instagram faces, TikTok-approved silhouettes, or influencer lighting, we're not just trying to understand the past, we're trying to reassure ourselves that we haven't lost control of the narrative. We bend history to our comfort zone, smoothing out the parts that challenge us and rebranding the rest as aesthetic. But the truth is, the past is not supposed to feel comfortable. It's supposed to feel different, foreign, awkward, and complicated. That's where the beauty lies, in the friction between then and now, between who we were and who we've become. When historical fiction becomes too polished, it loses its tension. It's become a fashion ad with accents. We don't learn anything and we don't feel anything because we're never really taken anywhere. It's like visiting a historical reenactment village where everyone is suspiciously attractive and no one has ever been cold or hungry. And this loss is more than visual, it's emotional. When you flatten the visual complexity of the past, you often flatten the emotional stakes of the story. Without the weight of history, without the burden of texture, without the heaviness of real fabric and real emotion, we're just left with dress up. So the question becomes, if the past is made to look exactly like the present, with the same beauty standards, the same fashion filters, the same curated glow, then what's the point of telling the stories at all? Why dress something up as historical if we're not willing to let it challenge our sense of beauty, identity, or time? Because in the end, history that is too pretty to be true becomes too fake to matter. So what does it all mean? We started with a simple question: why do historical costumes look so cheap now? But as we peel back the layers, it's become clear. This isn't just about thread count or fashion history. It's about a cultural shift, a visual shift, a deeper discomfort with anything that doesn't align with our current idea of perfection. We've let Instagram tell us what beauty looks like, and now it's telling us what history should look like. When we apply filters to our faces, we know we're adjusting reality. But when we apply those same filters metaphorically and literally to period dramas, we start distorting the past itself. We make the past palatable, pastel and pretty, but we also make it boring. We lose the weight, the texture, the messy, beautiful imperfection that once made history storytelling so rich. We're not just sanitizing costumes, we're sanitizing fantasy and history. The fantasy that let us escape into another time and feel something real. The fantasy that didn't need Botox or pastel corsets to captivate us. Just good storytelling, worn clothes, and the courage to let characters, especially women, be human. And perhaps the most unsettling of all, we're beginning to forget what depth even looks like. We scroll past it, we swipe away from it, we replace it with something more algorithm friendly, smoother and shinier and safer. But here's the truth. Perfection is forgettable. Texture is what stays with you. So the next time you watch a historical drama, ask yourself, do I feel like I'm visiting another world or just looking at this through a vintage filter? Because when we flatten the past to fit our feeds, we don't just lose accuracy, we lose meaning and we lose the past. So now I want to hear from you. What's one historical film or costume that truly transported you? What made it feel real to you? Let's talk about it in the comments below. I love to know your favorites. And it's true, I've noticed it a lot with all these Netflix shows now. I just don't like that they're trying to rewrite history too and like swap the characters and just like change everything. I'm like, I just need things to be historically accurate. I get people want the escape and they take it at face value. I understand that. I just find it hard to do that. Maybe I would if the scripts were good too, but to me it's just all bad. So it's not even just the costumes. It's like multifaceted. So I'd love to know your thoughts below. And if you have any good period pieces from the 20th century movies that you love, I'd love to know your thoughts on that too. All right, thanks for watching.